For almost as long as we've had video games about Spider-Man. After all, who among us hasn't wanted to do whatever a spider can? Whether it's spinning webs of any size, catching thieves just like flies, or channeling any of the wall crawler's other supernatural abilities, dozens of games have tried to capture the thrill of Marvel's most iconic hero with varying degrees of success.
Well, nobody ever said being a hero would be easy.
After all, you know the mark of a great Spider-Man game? That's right, it really makes you feel like Spider-Man, which is easier said than done. So join me for a look back at some of the best, worst, and weirdest Spider-Man video games of all time. Not just the first Spider-Man video game, but the first video game based on any Marvel character came swinging into stores in 1982.
Is this more action than even Spider-Man can handle?
A vertical action scroller, Spidey had to scale a building to defeat the Green Goblin and defuse his super bomb, fighting goons and defusing several regular bombs along the way. Like a lot of games of this era, it's quaint and rudimentary to look at today, but it was a simpler time, and amazingly, the entire game was developed in just 6 months by a sole programmer from Parker Brothers' budding video game division, Laura Nikolic. Nikolic had complete creative control and received no input whatsoever from anyone at Marvel, which is pretty wild when you consider the amount of stakeholders the property has in 2026 across comics, movies, shows, and games. However, that's not to say nobody at Marvel was interested in the burgeoning video game industry, and a few years later, Spidey's next interactive outing came in the form of Quest Probe, featuring Spider-Man. Quest Probe was a series of text adventures developed in collaboration between Marvel Comics and adventure game pioneer Scott Adams. Not the Dilbert guy, a different one. Quest Probe featuring Spider-Man also featured some great illustrations, courtesy of Marvel Comics veteran Al Milgrom, which were a good way to offset the entirely text-based gameplay that was arguably less visually interesting than the comic books it was attempting to gamify. While the first Spider-Man game was all action and the second one was mostly story, the wall crawler's third outing tried to split the difference. The Amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Dr. Doom's Revenge saw the two superpowered New Yorkers fighting a rogues gallery of D and C-list supervillains. While it's cool as a precursor to some great Marvel fighting games yet to come, the game otherwise just sucks. Awful hit detection, repetitive combat, and the baffling choice to have full-color UI but barely legible black and white gameplay were memorably bad enough that 12 years after it came out, Computer Gaming World ranked it 27th in the 50 worst games of all time, or at least that had been released prior to November 1996 when the article was published. All other gripes aside, CGW pointed out the fundamentally bad design choice that a video game starring an acrobatic superhero who climbs buildings and swings through the air was limited to horizontal scrolling gameplay. Hey, want to hear something weird? The first genuinely good video game to feature Spider-Man wasn't actually a Spider-Man game, and rather than letting you control the friendly neighborhood do-gooder, you had to kill him. Oh wait, it gets weirder. In the original release of the Super Shinobi, aka Revenge of Shinobi, Spider-Man shows up as a boss encounter. This would be surprising enough on its own, but halfway through, after taking enough damage, he transforms into Batman? In-universe, this is actually supposed to be a shapeshifter named Metamorpher who has complete and utter disregard for intellectual property law. In our universe, some changes did have to be made. Weirdly, Marvel was okay with Spider-Man showing up and gave SEGA the use of the official license. However, they had a few notes on Spider-Man's design and some issues with the fact that he transforms into their main competitor's most iconic comic book vigilante. In a later release of the game, rather than shapeshifting, Spider-Man would just tag Batman in, but apparently somebody at DC said something, so a version after that was released where Batman is just replaced with a knockoff of Devilman.
It's Marvel Comics' Amazing Spider-Man like you've never seen him before.
During the 16-bit era, Spider-Man starred in a lot of beat-em-ups, usually with some light platforming, as well as some platformers where you stop jumping around occasionally to beat some people up. One of the most notable ones is Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, which was released for Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, and SEGA CD. None of these games are what you'd call great, but they at least seem to be trying to make the player feel like Spider-Man, and in the Mega Drive version, Peter Parker too. In all versions, Spider-Man does some authentic Spider-Man-ly stuff, such as climb walls and swing from webbing. On Mega Drive, however, there was a photography mechanic that let Spidey capture key moments in-game that would earn his alter ego some money from the Daily Bugle, which could then be used to buy web fluid refills. It might not have been a massive open-world recreation of New York like we'd see in later games, but Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin's levels did have a real sense of place and scale compared to the earlier outings. Thanks to a non-linear structure and an overworld map, Spider-Man was allowed to go back to Peter's apartment to rest for a bit, but not for too long because Kingpin was holding the city hostage with a nuclear bomb and Spider-Man only has 24 hours to disarm it, and for some reason the timer speeds up when he's at home.
Peter, what you going to do?
Really though, that's underselling the plot, which is totally bonkers, especially in the SEGA CD version thanks to its fully voice-acted animated cutscenes, which are an absolute feast for the senses.
Officer, that nice young man in the long underwear saved my purse and all my money.
Anyway, Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, buys up airtime on the evening news to tell the citizens of New York City that Spider-Man stole a nuclear bomb and he's going to use it to blow up the city in 24 hours. But don't worry, because Fisk is offering a reward for his capture.
He has planted a bomb that will explode in exactly 24 hours, destroying the entire city.
I certainly never did that.
This already sounds like two completely separate half-baked schemes, but it gets even more convoluted. This bomb, which of course the Kingpin is actually in possession of, can only be defused using keys which have been distributed among Spider-Man's deadliest enemies.
Is this what you came for, Spider-Man?
Spider-Man then has to go and fight the bad guys to get the keys, but halfway through all of that, Kingpin sends Venom to kidnap Mary Jane, who he then holds hostage in his lair, dangling her over a vat of acid. So like, what's the Kingpin's goal here? To make other people capture Spider-Man? To lure Spider-Man to his lair to kill him personally? To kill Spider-Man's wife? Or to blow up New York City, where he lives and operates a vast criminal underworld? All of it seems like it'd be bad for everyone involved.
Sounds like a plan. Can I bring you back a hot dog?
I'd say yes, but you won't be coming back.
Well, regardless of the desired or undesired outcome, the SEGA CD version of this game features multiple fully animated endings. In the good one, Spider-Man saves the day, disarms the bomb, rescues MJ, and clears his name, causing J. Jonah Jameson moderate frustration because the Daily Bugle has to reprint the cover story.
Spider-Man's innocent.
What? No! He can't be!
In another ending, Kingpin kills Spider-Man and MJ by dumping them into a vat of acid. And in still another, Spider-Man beats the Kingpin and disarms the bomb, but MJ still gets melted in the vat and Spider-Man is left widowed? What the f***? But wait, there are not one but two endings that result in Spider-Man in police custody, one of which is the result of losing a pinball minigame, and of course, if you run out of time, New York City gets nuked. If you owned this game growing up, it's quite possible you never saw any of that. It was brutally difficult, as was customary at the time, to really make players feel like they were getting their money's worth. And that level of challenge didn't necessarily hurt sales. One developer later claimed that 2 out of 3 Mega Drive owners also bought a copy of Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, and it was so commercially successful that it convinced Marvel to let SEGA keep making games featuring their characters, presumably as long as they didn't turn him into Batman for no apparent reason. Marvel's licensing deal with SEGA was far from exclusive. Licensed game publishing powerhouse, aka shovelware factory LJN, was hard at work churning out Spider-Man games for every platform. Spider-Man: Return of the Sinister Six was released in 1992 for NES, Master System, and Game Gear, a straightforward action platformer that did a decent job capturing the thrill of doing flips and punching street-level goons so hard they explode into chunks. As the title alludes to, there are 6 main antagonists, each with their own dedicated level and boss fight. However, in the NES version, Spider-Man had just 1 life and 1 continue, while each boss had multiple health bars. Thankfully, the SEGA versions were slightly easier. And also, Spider-Man turned into Batman. Nah, I'm just kidding, he didn't do that. While Return of the Sinister Six was loosely based on the comic run of the same name, it probably made some people think the video game was a sequel to some other game that introduced the Sinister Six, which it wasn't. Even more confusing was Spider-Man and X-Men in Arcade's Revenge, which sounds like the sequel to a hit arcade game. In reality, it's an original console game that pits Spidey and Xavier's gifted youngsters against Arcade, a C-tier villain who, for all intents and purposes, is a regular man who periodically kidnaps some of the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe.
Tired of the same old fun and games? Welcome, Spider-Man X-Men, to the video game ride of your lives!
In the comics, this sadistic nerd's high-tech carnival games have regularly given Omega-level mutants and literal gods a run for their money. So in that sense, Arcade's Revenge really did make you feel like Spider-Man, just Spider-Man while he's being tormented by a psychopathic carny who acts like Jigsaw and looks like Carrot Top working at an ice cream parlor. One Marvel character who blew up big time in the 90s, as we all know, was Venom, and one ambitious game set out to do something that had never even been attempted before, to really make you feel like Spider-Man and also feel like Venom, and that game was Maximum Carnage.
Maximum Carnage.
Maximum Carnage was released in 1994, retelling the issues of the 14-issue crossover event that took place across multiple Marvel titles the year before. Of course, since it was a beat-em-up, it predominantly focused on the events involving Spider-Man and Venom walking around beating people up. The Despite the primary selling point being its dual protagonists, Maximum Carnage's maximum number of players was 1. Maximum Carnage did receive a sequel a year later in Separation Anxiety, which allowed for co-op but otherwise paled in comparison to its predecessor. It probably didn't help that by 1995 the market was pretty saturated with Spider-Man games. Separation Anxiety was the 10th Spider-Man game released in half as many years, and there were still more to come, at least partly thanks to the success of Spider-Man the Animated Series, which debuted on Fox Kids in late '94. The animated series got a video game tie-in of its own. It's definitely not a great video game, and it commits the same offenses as countless other 16-bit licensed games. It's an uninspired side-scroller that artificially pads out what would be a short experience with cheaply cranked-up difficulty, which is further compounded by imprecise combat, platforming, and controls. However, the worst crime this game commits is its soundtrack, which is above and beyond some of the worst music of all time in a video game or otherwise. The theme song for the animated series is already a tad grating, but when played through the farty, crunchy little Sega Genesis sound chip, it sounds like a dot matrix printer arguing with a circular saw while a robot tries to intervene by yelling incoherently about radioactive spider blood. Somehow, the music for the Funhouse level is much worse. However, if we're celebrating the weirdest noises to come out of an officially licensed game based on Spider-Man the Animated Series, that incredibly specific honor goes to the Spider-Man Cartoon Maker. Not technically a game, but a profoundly janky piece of vaguely educational PC software that let users tell their own stories. I can only speak from my own experience, but most of my original stories revolved around the Kingpin farting so much he exploded. Or J. Jonah Jameson walking into traffic and exploding. Or so many Venoms being on screen at once that the cops show up and then everyone explodes. No matter how weird aspiring animators got with the Cartoon Maker, the results somewhat resembled the original cartoon. The same can't be said for the bizarre PC game Spider-Man: The Sinister Six. Clearly, a lot of work was put into the rotoscoped animation, which looks somewhere between an Adult Swim show and an anti-sexual harassment training video.
Don't feel bad. He hates everyone.
I think I'm going to have to learn a little bit more about good old Chippy.
A Spider-Man adventure game is a great idea, but this one was unfortunately punctuated by some almost unplayably bad action sequences.
I'm from the ratings board. This show has been canceled.
If there's a missing link in the evolution of console gaming, it's gotta be Sega's 32X. This vestigial half-measure of a console was an add-on to the Genesis released in 1994, meant to give the 16-bit hardware a little more oomph until the Sega Saturn arrived, which it did a year later, making the 32X immediately seem like an obsolete stopgap. The best time to release a 32X game would be never, but if there's a worse time, it's in 1996, a year after the Sega Saturn hit store shelves, which is exactly when Spider-Man Web of Fire came out. Developed by Blue Sky, the studio behind Vector Man, Web of Fire was a similarly fast-paced action platformer. From a distance, it's barely distinguishable from the majority of other Spider-Man games released that decade. A couple things that make it stand out are its esoteric villains. A group called the New Enforcers consisting of Dragon Man, Eel, Thermite, Blitz, Super Adaptoid, and Vanisher. Some of those names likely ring a bell for comic fans, but for some perspective, between the MCU, Fox's X-Men movies, and everything in between, including all 7 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the only one of these characters to make a live-action appearance yet is Vanisher, although appearance is maybe the wrong word, since he's only actually visible for about 2 seconds, getting electrocuted in Deadpool 2, played by Brad Pitt.
Really? All right.
Anyway, the only thing more obscure than this game's bad guys is the game itself. It was the final game released for the 32X exclusively in North America after Sega had already announced the system's discontinuation, so Web of Fire has since become quite a sought-after collectible for weirdos. Just the cartridge will easily sell for $500, and copies that still have the box and manual go for 2 to 3 times that price all the time.
Last time I checked, I was Spider-Man.
As we swung into a whole new millennium, Spider-Man swung into a whole new dimension, the third dimension. Spider-Man's next game was developed by Neversoft, a studio hot off the success of another game about an animal-themed superhuman, namely the Birdman, aka Tony Hawk. With Spider-Man, they set out to revolutionize wall crawling and web slinging the same way they had skateboarding. The boxy, low-poly graphics might be dated, but the mechanics were groundbreaking and laid a solid foundation for all future Spider-Man games. As IGN's 9 out of 10 review put it, this game makes you feel like Spider-Man. Activision's first Spider-Man game for PS1, N64, and Dreamcast was a step towards shedding the bad reputation the license had earned from the dozens of crappy games in years prior. However, the handheld version was less of a leap forward. Developed by Vicarious Visions for Game Boy Color, the technical limitations posed the same challenges faced by the 8 and 16-bit consoles. Still, this little game explored an idea that would eventually become integral to Spider-Man games, an open world. It's not immediately apparent at this resolution or in 2D, but the Game Boy Color version featured a large overworld that branched off into 6 other areas which players could tackle in whatever order they wanted. A year later, Vicarious Visions would tackle a sequel to Neversoft's console game with Enter Electro, but its launch was unfortunately timed. It was released on PS1 the very same week that Grand Theft Auto 3 hit PlayStation 2, when millions of gamers were much more focused on committing crime than fighting it. The following summer, Spider-Mania was in full effect following Sam Raimi's seminal superhero flick, which brought with it a deluge of merchandise and officially licensed product tie-ins. And amidst the action figures, Pop-Tarts, and the very first ever superhero Lego sets was a whole new generation of Spider-Man video games.
Wouldn't it be great if you could go beyond the movie? Welcome to Spider-Man, the game.
The console versions, developed by Treyarch, took full advantage of the increased horsepower of the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Despite the fact that a seasoned player could beat the game in slightly more time than it takes to sit through the movie it was based on, the devs managed to squeeze in a bunch of extra villains who hadn't yet appeared in live action. In addition to Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, Spider-Man also tussled with Shocker, the Scorpion, Vulture, and if you had the Xbox version, also Kraven the Hunter. And yet again, the full-size console game had a handheld counterpart, but Digital Eclipse's pocket-sized platformer for the Game Boy Advance held its own. Instead of attempting to ape the film's realism, it leaned heavily into the comic book aesthetic instead, punctuating its punches with brightly colored bursts of onomatopoeia text. Sam Raimi's second Spider-Man film would refine and expand on what made the first installment so great, and Treyarch would follow suit with the official video game of Spider-Man 2. The console versions are considered by many to be the best Spider-Man game to date, and objectively one of the best movie tie-ins of all time. Obviously, crime fighting was a priority, but other aspects of Peter Parker's life were gamified, whether that was snapping photos for the Daily Bugle on a tight deadline.
I don't pay you for your opinion, Parker. I pay you for photos.
Taking Mary Jane on dates, delivering pizza to make rent, or even retrieving lost balloons for distraught children. Best of all, our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man was no longer relegated to one level-based neighborhood at a time. Not only was Spider-Man 2's open-world version of Manhattan a blast to explore, but the acrobatic traversal made it a joy to just swing around aimlessly. PC gamers often get subpar ports of console games, but they're usually the same games, just poorly optimized or maybe a buggy mess. In the case of Spider-Man 2, PC players got an entirely different game, which not only wasn't open world, it couldn't even swinging. Players had to use the mouse cursor to target individual nodes to latch onto, which, I hate to say it, doesn't really make you feel like Spider-Man. In between movie tie-ins, Activision spun up a comic book tie-in instead. Released in 2005, Ultimate Spider-Man was set in Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley's rebooted universe, fitting neatly into the timeline between issues 85 and 86. Well, neatly if you handwave some slight continuity errors, like Silver Sable completely forgetting Spider-Man's secret identity despite the fact that she fought him out of his costume, and that the other events of the game were then loosely retold several dozen issues later. Nerdy nitpicks aside, Ultimate Spider-Man was a really cool idea executed well, and its cel-shaded visuals offered a much more faithful interpretation of that source material than the movie-inspired game's attempt at photorealism. But a year later, Spidey would soon be swinging across the uncanny valley with ease thanks to the increased horsepower of a new generation of consoles, most notably the PlayStation 3, which used the same font as the Spider-Man movies. What's up with that? Okay, so why did the PlayStation 3 logo use the Spider-Man font? Well, short answer, because it looked cool. Slightly longer answer, because Sony Computer Entertainment and PlayStation godfather Ken Kutaragi thought it looked cool, and also felt that the curved letters matched the new console's sleek form factor, just as the blocky letters of the PS2 logo matched the previous console's angular silhouette. It was also good brand synergy, since Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films were distributed by Sony Pictures, but the reality is the Spider-Man font was designed almost a decade before the first film came out, and by the time the PlayStation 3 was unveiled, it had also been used on the poster for Equilibrium, marketing materials for Janet Jackson's 1998 Velvet Rope World Tour, and the cover of the Smashing Pumpkins single for 1979. So the real question shouldn't be, why did the PS3 use the Spider-Man font, but rather, why did Spider-Man use the Animorphs font?
All I know is, now I'm an Animorph.
Anyway, a year after the third PlayStation console launch, Sam Raimi's third Spider-Man movie arrived. Both were riding high on the success of their predecessor, but despite their shiny new exterior redesigns, both suffered from having overcomplicated innards with too many moving parts. Over time, game devs did amazing things with the PS3's complex cell architecture, and Spider-Man 3's quirks earned it a cult following. But sadly, the official Spider-Man 3 video game tie-in face-planted harder than a failed QuickTime event.
I'm going to die!
You know, aside from having some truly hilarious results for failed QuickTime events. Around this time, Activision's business model was to annualize every game franchise it could. The Spider-Man film franchise had become thoroughly entangled in development hell, and with no blockbuster movies to pull from, the publisher was forced to get creative in order to have a new Spider-Man game on store shelves every holiday season. Friend or Foe borrowed character designs from the Raimiverse, but featured an original story that involved Spider-Man befriending his worst enemies to team up against bigger threats, which was an endearingly wholesome mechanic in the wake of Tobey Maguire's recent edgelord phase.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
Web of Shadows expanded on this team-up mechanic in a slightly more serious way, introducing a morality system that would determine who wanted to team up with Spidey. If he maintained his friendly neighborhood good guy image, he'd get help from Luke Cage, Wolverine, and Moon Knight, but if he indulged the symbiote suit's desire to break bad, he would find himself hanging out with the wrong crowd like Electro or the Rhino. In 2010, Shattered Dimensions scrapped the tried-and-true open-world structure for a more linear progression, but made up for it by ambitiously featuring 4 playable Spider-Men from 4 alternate continuities. Written by longtime Spidey scribe Dan Slott, Shattered Dimensions is actually the first major piece of media to explore the Spider-Verse concept. Slott was behind the Spider-Verse crossover event in the comics 4 years later, which would in turn become the basis for the animated Spider-Verse films and a central plot point in the live-action MCU ones. Shattered Dimensions' immediate follow-up was Edge of Time, which paled in comparison by featuring 50% less Spider-Men, focusing solely on the amazing Peter Parker and Miguel O'Hara from the year 2099. Now, none of these games are incredible, but they are all leaps and bounds beyond some of the duds from the 8 and 16-bit eras, and there's a case to be made that any of them could have gone on to become proper classics if they'd benefited from some more development time rather than being beholden to Activision's whole annualized business model. In 2012, Sony Pictures went back to basics on the big screen with its first cinematic reboot, The Amazing Spider-Man, and Activision took a more conventional approach for the official tie-in. Developed by Beanox, who'd been behind the previous 2 timeline-jumping adventures, The Amazing Spider-Man turned an Andrew Garfield-shaped web-slinger loose in an open-world Manhattan to do whatever a spider can, and had previously done in several other games. However, this iteration of Spider-Man had learned a few new tricks since the Raimi-era tie-ins. Combat took some cues from Batman's moves in the first 2 Arkham games, which had come and gone since the first Spider-Man trilogy. Meanwhile, Spidey Sense now manifested as a slow-motion ability, a bit like Max Payne's Bullet Time. It wasn't Game of the Year material by a long shot, but it was far from the worst movie tie-in ever made, and a lot of people will forgive a lot of shortcomings in a game that at least partially involves swinging around a city as Spider-Man. Even if it only just sort of makes you feel like Spider-Man a tiny bit, that's still a pretty good feeling in a video game. In 2026, the idea of a full-price video game getting a sequel in under 3 years seems just impossible, but Beanox managed to turn around another game in time for The Amazing Spider-Man 2's 2014 premiere. The source material was itself kind of a messy rush job that could have used more development time, and the game suffered similar issues. It built on the systems of its predecessor, which weren't exactly groundbreaking the first time, but had worn thin the second time around, and the quick turnaround didn't make for the most polished experience. Yet again, it's not Game of the Year material, but again, it also wasn't the worst movie tie-in ever made. However, it would turn out to be one of the last. In the wake of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, there have been very few video game tie-ins made to coincide with the premiere of a major motion picture. Not counting mobile games, short VR experiences, or LEGO games, by my count, it's been less than half a dozen. The most recent of these were Space Jam: A New Legacy and The Mummy Demastered, 2 retro-styled games seemingly designed less to cash in on their respective movies themselves and more to cash in on nostalgia for the days when every movie got its own video game. So with that in mind, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was a really interesting piece of video game history. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to revisit. Shortly after it came out, Activision's deal with Marvel expired and the publisher proceeded to delist all its licensed games from digital storefronts, which really sucks from a game preservation standpoint and really sucks if you're trying to write a 5,000-word feature on the history of Spider-Man games. Not gonna make it petty, but come on. Looking back at the mountain of annualized releases and pile of mediocre movie tie-ins released under Activision, the powers that be at Marvel Games seemingly recognized that churning out a Spider-Man game to coincide with every feature film and/or holiday shopping season was not only a bad idea in the first place, but borderline impossible. The fidelity and complexity of video games by the mid-2010s meant development cost more and took longer, and for multi-billion-dollar IPs like Spider-Man and the rest of the Marvel Universe, the options were basically go big or go home. Thankfully, Marvel Games decided to go big with a new approach, licensing Marvel properties to studios with experience making games that would align well with the source material and then just letting them do their thing. First stop, a team with tons of experience making games featuring colorful characters with cool abilities who move around their worlds in interesting ways, Insomniac Games.
Open the safe! Do it!
Hey, fellas.
Ah! Spider-Man! Shoot him!
If you've sat through this long video about Spider-Man games in the year 2026, I'm going to assume that you're already well aware of Insomniac's contributions to the interactive Spider-Man mythos. Since its 2018 launch, Marvel's Spider-Man has gone on to become one of the best-selling PS4 games in the console's lifetime, holding its own against heavy hitters like GTA 5 and various Calls of Duty. When you account for Spider-Man's subsequent remastered PS5 version and eventual PC port, it's sold over 50 million units to date. The fan-favorite 2020 side story, Spider-Man Miles Morales, launched alongside the PlayStation 5, making it one of the better console launch titles in recent memory. And after finally dropping in 2023, Insomniac's long-awaited full-size next-gen sequel has already sold well over 16 million copies as of late 2025. So statistically speaking, you've probably played one of these games, and you already know why they're so great. They really make you feel like Spider-Man, unless you're playing as Mary Jane. What's on the horizon for Spider-Man in video games from here? Well, Insomniac's currently busy with another occasional Avenger, but the old webhead certainly gets around. Whether it's teaming up with other Marvel icons in games like Midnight Suns and Cosmic Invasion, or throwing down in more competitive fare like Marvel Rivals and Marvel Tokon Fighting Souls, we do not have a shortage of video games that involve Spider-Man, and it's really worth taking a moment to appreciate just how far they've come in the last almost 50 years. So there you have it, true believers, a crash course in the history of some of the best, worst, and weirdest Spider-Man games ever made, but not every single one of them. Which one did I leave out? Sound off in the comments below with the game that made you feel the most like Spider-Man. As always, for all things gaming, comics, movies, and everything in between, keep it locked to your friendly neighborhood IGN.